HOA ordered me to remove my boat. Not knowing I controlled the entire lake, they sent me letters. They sent me threats. They even said my boat ruined the view. But what they didn't know was that the lake itself, the water their kids swam in, the shore where they held parties, the place they thought they ruled, it all belonged to me. And the day they tried to take my boat away was the day I took everything from them. Welcome back to HOA Unit, the place where every rule, every fine, and every power trip turns into a story. My name is Daniel. I live in a quiet lakeside neighborhood. I work as an engineer, and I moved here for peace and calm. But peace is the last thing you get when an HOA decides to control your life. This is my story, and it all began with a simple letter about my boat. It all started with a letter on my door. I came home from work, tired, ready to sit by the water, ready to watch the sunset over the lake. But instead of peace, I found a white paper taped right across my front door. It had the HOA logo printed on top. Big, bold letters, with that fake polite tone they always use. It said my boat had to be removed immediately. They claimed it broke community rules. They claimed it was blocking the view of the lake. They claimed it ruined the harmony of the neighborhood. I stood there on the porch, reading it over and over, and with every line, I felt this strange mix of anger and laughter building inside me, because that boat, the one they were so angry about, wasn't even on their property. It was sitting right on the lake, and that lake was mine. But of course, they didn't know that yet. The next morning I saw her, the HOA president. Her name was Susan. She was standing at the shore with 2 other board members, pointing at my boat. Her lips were smiley, but her eyes were sharp like knives. She waved at me like she was in charge of the whole world. "Your boat is disturbing the community. We'll need you to move it," she said, like it was the most natural thing to order someone around. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, then at the water, and then back at her again, because in that moment, I realized she had no idea. She thought she had power. She thought she could boss me around. She thought I was just another neighbor she could push, but I wasn't. Let me tell you something about this neighborhood. It looks perfect from the outside. Houses lined up like teeth, lawns cut like they were measured with a ruler, mailboxes painted the same color, a place that pretends to be peaceful. But inside, it's all about control. The HOA loves rules, grass height rules, fence color rules, even rules about how long your trash bins can sit outside. Miss one thing, and they'll fine you. Disagree with them, and they'll shame you in the next meeting. And now, my boat was their new target that night. I sat on the dock with a cup of coffee. The boat rocked gently on the water. The air was quiet, except for the crickets. And I thought about their letter again. Part of me wanted to just laugh and throw it away. But another part of me, the part that hated bullies, started planning, because what the HOA didn't know, what Susan didn't know, was that years ago, I made a deal with the old owner of the land. I bought the lake, every single inch of it. The deed was in my safe, with my name printed clearly across it. That meant the water, the fish, the docks, the shoreline, everything was mine. And yet, here they were, trying to order me off my own property. I didn't tell them right away. I let them talk. I let them send their little notices. I let them gather at the shore and gossip about me. It was almost funny, like watching actors in a play, not realizing the stage itself belonged to me. But deep down, I felt something else too. A slow burn of anger, because it wasn't just about the boat. It was about power. It was about them believing they could control me, believing they could control everything. That's what HOAs do best. They smile in your face, then they stab you with rules, and they expect you to just take it. But I wasn't going to take it. The first week passed, and they sent another letter. This time it was more aggressive. It said if I didn't move my boat within 7 days, I would be fined $200 for every day it remained. They said they were protecting the beauty of the lake. They said they were preserving the community spirit. I almost choked laughing when I read that, preserving the community spirit. On my lake, the irony was too perfect. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't move the boat. I didn't respond to their letters, and that made them furious. I could see it in Susan's face every time she walked by. Her forced smile got tighter, her voice got sharper, her little group of board members started whispering louder whenever I was around. They thought they were winning, they thought they were scaring me, but they had no clue. They were standing on thin ice, and it was about to crack. The thing about control is, it only works if people believe in it. If people think you have power, you do. But the moment they see through it, it's gone. And Susan's power was already slipping because I wasn't moving that boat. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Every evening I would sit on the dock, watching the boat float peacefully, and I kept thinking, how long should I let them play this little game? How long should I leave? And then believe they're in charge, and how sweet would it be when I finally show them the truth, because one thing was certain. When I revealed who really owned the lake, it wouldn't just be about the boat anymore. It would be about everything they thought they controlled. And here's the funny part. They had no backup plan. They were so sure of themselves, so sure they ruled every inch of this neighborhood, that they never once checked the records, never once looked at the deed, never once asked the one question that could have saved them from embarrassment: who really owns the lake? Now tell me, if your HOA came after you like this, if they tried to take something away that was yours, would you play along and obey their rules, or would you stay silent and wait for the perfect moment to strike back? The days kept passing, and the letters kept coming. Every notice was louder than the last, each one filled with threats, with warnings, with rules written like they were holy scripture. By the third week, they claimed my boat was now a danger to the community. They said children might trip on it from the shore. They said it could pollute the lake. They said it was unsightly for visitors. Visitors on my lake. I almost wanted to frame that letter. It was so ridiculous. That Friday, there was a knock on my door. Not just a soft, polite knock, but a sharp, impatient one. The kind of knock that says we are not asking. When I opened the door, Susan was standing there. Her smile was wide, fake as always. Behind her were two men from the HOA board. All three were dressed like they were attending some business meeting, clipboards in hand, pens ready, like soldiers marching into battle. "Daniel, we've been patient," Susan said, "but the board has voted, and the decision is final. Your boat must go." She tilted her head slightly, like a teacher scolding a student. Her voice was sweet, but the threat was clear underneath. I leaned against the doorframe. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just looked at her, long enough to make her uncomfortable. Finally, I asked, "And if it doesn't go?" Her smile twitched. Then she looked at her clipboard. "You'll be fined daily, and eventually, legal action will be taken." She said it like a promise, like she believed her words could scare me, but all I could think was, legal action on what? My own property. When they left, I stood in my living room staring at the letter in my hand. Something shifted inside me that day. Up until then, it was funny, a game, their pettiness versus my patience. But that moment, I felt something darker. A fire rising in my chest, because this wasn't just about my boat anymore. This was about my freedom, about the quiet life I worked for, about the water I owned, that they wanted to control. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying her words in my head. The way she stood there, the way her eyes narrowed when I didn't obey, the way she acted like she was a queen, and we were all just servants in her little kingdom, and I thought, what happens when a queen realizes her crown is fake? The next morning I walked to the lake. It was early. The mist was still rising from the water. The sun painted the surface gold. My boat floated there, calm, unbothered, free, and for a moment I felt peace again. But then I saw movement on the other side of the lake. 2 men in bright vests, hammering something into the ground. I squinted and realized what it was, a sign, freshly painted, nailed into the dirt. It read, Community Lake, property of HOA. No unauthorized boats allowed. I stood frozen. My fists clenched. The audacity was almost impressive. They didn't own the lake, but here they were, branding it as theirs. It was like someone walking into your house, putting their name on the wall, and daring you to stop them. I walked closer, and one of the men looked at me nervously. He wasn't HOA, just some hired worker. But before I could say anything, Susan appeared again. She was standing by the trees, watching me, arms crossed. Lovely morning, isn't it? She said. Her tone was calm, but I could feel the tension. Her eyes locked on mine, waiting, daring me to protest. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just stared at the sign, then back at her. And I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. Because while she thought she was winning, she had no idea how close she was to losing everything. That evening I went into my study. I opened my safe, and I pulled out the papers, the deed to the lake, my name written in black ink, clear and undeniable. I placed it on my desk and stared at it under the lamplight. This single piece of paper was the weapon she could never see coming, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I didn't just want to protect my boat anymore. I wanted to destroy her power. I wanted to take the crown off her head in front of everyone, because bullies don't stop if you back down. They stop when you show them who really holds the cards. But I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. No, not yet. I wanted to wait until the perfect moment. I wanted to let them dig deeper. I wanted them to make fools of themselves first. So I stayed quiet. I let the sign stay. I let the whispers spread in the neighborhood. I let Susan think she was untouchable, because when the fall came, it would be harder, louder, and much more satisfying over the next week. I noticed something new. Neighbors started to glance at me differently. Some looked away quickly. Some whispered when I walked past. Some even avoided me completely. Susan was poisoning the well, telling them lies, telling them my boat was illegal, that I was stubborn, that I was making life harder for the community, and the sad thing was, many believed her. That's how HOA power works. It's not about truth, it's about perception. And she was a master at twisting it. But what she didn't know was that perception can change in an instant. One reveal, one truth, one shock, and everything flips. One night, sitting on my porch, I asked myself a question. Why do people like Susan crave so much control? Why do they need to feel bigger than everyone else? Is it fear? Is it pride? Or is it something darker? A hunger that never ends? I don't know, but I knew this. Her hunger was about to starve. Now let me ask you something. If you were me, holding the deed in your hand, watching them lie and claim power over something that was yours, would you reveal the truth immediately to shut them down, or would you wait, let them embarrass themselves more, and then strike at the perfect moment? It started with whispers, then it turned into stares, and before long, it became open hostility. Everywhere I went in the neighborhood, I felt the shift. Neighbors who once waved at me now crossed the street. Mothers pulled their kids closer when I walked past. Fathers stood on their lawns, arms folded, glaring at me like I was an enemy, all because of one boat. But the truth was, it wasn't the boat. It was the story Susan was spinning. She told them I was selfish. She told them I didn't respect the community. She told them my boat was polluting the water their children swam in. She told them I thought I was above the rules. And the worst part, they believed her one afternoon. I came home to find another letter, but this one wasn't from the HOA board. It was signed by over 20 neighbors. They demanded I move the boat for the good of everyone. They claimed it was making the community look bad. They even accused me of lowering their property values, over a boat that floated quietly on the lake every day. I sat on my porch, holding the letter. The sound of kids playing in the distance, and for the first time, I didn't laugh. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was something colder, like the whole neighborhood had turned into a jury, and I was the man on trial. That weekend, the HOA called a special meeting. The entire neighborhood was invited. Susan stood in the center of the clubhouse, her posture tall, her smile wide, her eyes sharp. She welcomed everyone like she was a queen addressing her kingdom. And then she began her speech. She talked about rules. She talked about order. She talked about fairness. Her voice rose and fell like a rehearsed performance. And finally, she turned the spotlight on me. Some people believe they are bigger than the community, she said. They refuse to follow simple rules. They refuse to respect their neighbors. They believe they can do whatever they want. Every head in the room slowly turned toward me. Every pair of eyes, heavy, judgmental. I just sat there silently, my arms crossed, my jaw tight. Susan wasn't just trying to take my boat anymore. She was trying to isolate me, to turn me into the villain of her perfect little world. When the meeting ended, I walked out without saying a word, but as I stepped into the night air, I made myself a promise. I would not be their villain, and I would not be their victim either. They wanted a fight, fine, but they had no idea the kind of fight they were about to get. The next morning, something new appeared on the lake, a banner, strung across 2 poles near the shore. It read HOA Fishing Tournament, Community Event. This Saturday, I stared at it for a long moment. The rage hit me so fast I almost laughed, because not only were they trying to ban my boat, now they were planning an event on my lake. They were about to march onto property they didn't own, invite people to fish in water that wasn't theirs, and pretend they were in charge of it all. That was the moment I knew. The waiting game was almost over, but not yet, not quite yet. That week felt like a storm building. Every time I walked outside, I saw more neighbors preparing for the tournament, polishing their fishing rods, gathering coolers, talking about how much fun it would be. They avoided looking at me, but I could hear the smugness in their voices, like they already won, like the lake belonged to them now. And Susan, oh Susan, she walked around the neighborhood like a queen before her coronation, smiling, nodding, pretending she was the savior of the community. But deep down, I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just proud, she was drunk on power. And power makes people blind. The night before the tournament, I stood by the water, the moonlight rippling across the lake, my boat rocking gently in the darkness. I held the deed in my hands, feeling the weight of it. This single paper was everything, the key to ending this war, the weapon that could shatter their illusion in seconds. But I also felt something else, a strange calm, like the lake itself was whispering to me, telling me to wait just one more day, because tomorrow everything would change. Saturday came like thunder. The neighborhood swarmed to the lake. Dozens of people lined up with rods and nets, kids laughing, adults chatting, coolers filled with drinks, the sound of music playing from a speaker. It looked like a festival. And there, in the middle of it all, was Susan, her head held high, her voice loud and cheerful. She welcomed everyone to our community lake. She acted like she was queen of the way. Till I stood at the edge, watching, calm, silent, waiting, when the whistle blew and the fishing began. That was when I stepped forward. I walked down to the dock, every head turned toward me. The air grew heavy, silent, like the calm before a storm. Susan froze mid-sentence when she saw me. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowed. I held the papers high in my hand, and I spoke in a voice louder than I ever had. This lake does not belong to the HOA. The crowd murmured, confused, shocked. I unfolded the deed, showing it to everyone. This lake belongs to me. I own every drop of water, every inch of shoreline, and this event is trespassing on private property. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors looked at each other, faces twisted in confusion. Then in anger, and Susan. Her face turned red, her smile completely gone. In that moment, power shifted. The queen's crown cracked, her perfect little illusion shattered. But this was only the beginning, because now, the entire neighborhood knew the truth. And the question was, what would they do next? Now let me ask you something. If you were standing there in front of all your neighbors, holding the proof that you owned everything they thought was theirs, would you show mercy? Let them keep using the lake under your rules, or would you take it all away and make them pay for every lie they told? The silence after my words felt heavier than the lake itself. I stood on the dock, holding the deed in the air, my voice still echoing across the water. Dozens of eyes stared at me, some wide with shock, others narrowing with anger. The music stopped, the laughter died, the fishing rods dropped into the grass, and right there in the center of it all, Susan's smile finally broke. Her lips trembled, her eyes burned, her face turned the color of fire. For the first time, she didn't look like a queen. She looked like someone who had just lost her crown in front of her entire kingdom. One of the neighbors shouted, "Is that true?" Another whispered, "He owns the lake." And then, the murmurs spread like wildfire, confusion, doubt, anger. Some looked at me with awe, some looked at me with suspicion, and some, especially the ones closest to Susan, looked at me like I was the enemy of the community. But I didn't move. I didn't explain, I didn't apologize, I just held the papers, steady in my hand, and let them all see the truth. Susan finally stepped forward, her heels clacking against the dock, her voice shaking at first, then growing sharper with every word. "This is outrageous. These papers mean nothing. This is a community lake. It has always been a community lake." Her words were desperate, but her tone tried to sound confident. She was cornered, but she still wanted control. I turned the papers so she could see them clearly. My name printed in bold, the official stamp, the signatures. "This lake was sold to me years ago," I said, "legally, completely. And there's nothing in your rules that changes that." The crowd gasped again, and Susan's face drained of color. She tried to laugh it off. She tried to twist the story. She called me selfish, arrogant, a man trying to take away something that belonged to everyone. But her words no longer had the same power, because now, they all knew the truth was bigger than her lies. Still, she refused to let go. That evening, when everyone left in shock, I found another letter in my mailbox. This one was different. Not a warning, not a notice, but a threat. It claimed the HOA was investigating the legality of my so-called ownership. It said they would contact lawyers. It said they would prove the lake was not mine. I read the letter under my porch light, and for the first time in weeks, I actually laughed out loud, because here's the thing about power. When liars get exposed, they don't back down, they double down. They get lazy size, outer, nastier. more desperate. And Susan was about to get desperate enough to destroy herself the very next day. I saw a man in a suit walking the property lines, measuring the shoreline, taking pictures, making notes, a lawyer hired by the HOA. He looked at me once, nodded politely, then kept working, like he was preparing for a war. I didn't bother stopping him. Let them waste their money. Let them dig their own grave, because at the end of the day, the papers in my safe were stronger than any of their words. But while they planned their attack, something strange began happening. Neighbors started choosing sides. Some came to me quietly, saying they were sorry. They admitted they never knew I owned the lake. They said they supported me. They even said Susan had gone too far. But others, the ones who believed every word out of her mouth, grew colder. They scowled when I walked by. They whispered louder when I passed. One man even shouted across the street, calling me a thief, a liar, a traitor to the neighborhood. It was no longer just me versus Susan. It was me versus half the neighborhood. One night, as I sat on my dock watching the water ripple under the moonlight, I heard footsteps. When I turned, I saw Susan standing at the edge of my yard. Her face was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that hides a storm underneath. "We'll see you in court," she said quietly. No smile this time, no fake sweetness, just pure venom. Then she turned and walked away into the shadows. For a moment, I actually felt a chill, because this wasn't just a petty fight anymore. This was war, and wars have casualties. I thought about what might come next. Court battles, more lies, more neighbors turning against me. And I asked myself, was this fight worth it? But then I looked at the lake, the water glimmering in the silver light, my boat rocking gently in the breeze, and I knew the answer. Yes, it was worth every battle, because this wasn't just about a boat. It wasn't even just about a lake. It was about standing up against people who believe they own you when they don't. The following week, the HOA sent out another notice, this one to the entire neighborhood. It warned everyone that certain individuals were trying to disrupt the unity of the community. It warned them not to believe lies. It promised that the HOA would protect them from people who wanted to take what was not theirs. The letter never mentioned my name, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who it was about. And here's the irony. The more Susan fought me, the more people began to question her. The more desperate her letters sounded, the more cracks appeared in her perfect image. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more she lost it, because truth has a way of shining through the cracks, even when people try to cover it with lies. But one question haunted me as I folded that letter and tossed it in the trash. How far would she go? How far would the HOA push? Would they actually drag me into court? Would they try to bankrupt me with fees and lawyers? Would they cross the line from petty to dangerous? I didn't know yet, but I had a feeling that line was closer than I thought. So let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, facing an HOA that was now ready to use lawyers and lies to destroy you, would you fight them head-on in court with the truth, or would you use their own arrogance against them and make them collapse under the weight of their own rules? The notices kept coming, thicker than leaves in autumn. Every envelope felt like a new attack. They called them violations and requests for remediation. But underneath it all, it was punishment wrapped in paper. They said my dock was not painted the approved color. They said my boat cover was a shade too dark. They said my rope hung too low when tied to the cleat. They counted the inches of everything, as if that would break me. I read each letter slowly, like a man reading a will. They wanted to bleed me dry with fines. They wanted to make me small with rules. They thought money and humiliation would force me to move the boat. So I did something they never expected. I obeyed them. To the last ridiculous demand, I bought the exact shade of paint from their approved list. I adjusted the rope by 1/2 inch, then another 1/2 inch. I replaced the boat cover with the right fabric they suggested. I filled out forms in triplicate and signed in blue ink. I even glued a label with the HOA's approved catalog number on my dock post. It looked stupid and a little cruel, but it was also delicious. They watched me with blind fury as I followed every rule. Their smirks turned into confusion. Their power looked smaller when I gave it exactly what it wanted, because rules are like fire. If you feed them carefully, they warm you. If you feed them too much, they burn themselves out. Every compliance letter I returned, stamped and photo documented, made their threats weaker. Their lawyers complained that I was obstructive by sending evidence. They tried to fine me for behavior they listed in their own rulebook, and every time I produced proof that I had followed the rule they thought I had broken. It became a game of their making, and I learned to play better than they did, but I did more than follow rules. I started to use their board meetings as stage shows. I showed up early with copies of the deed in my coat pocket. I smiled when Susan spoke and applauded politely when others cheered her on. Then I would ask simple questions, direct and calm. Who approved the banner last week? Which rule lets the HOA host events on private property? Can the board produce a permit for the tournament? Each question landed like a pebble in a pond. Ripples of doubt spread across faces that once nodded without thinking. When they couldn't answer, their confidence cracked. Some neighbors began to lean toward me in conversations. I never knew they could do that. One woman whispered, "They never even showed us a permit." Another man admitted, little by little. The narrative shifted. No longer was I the villain. Now I was the neighbor who cared about proof and fairness. Susan grew meaner with every question I asked. Her smile hardened into a grim line. She would prepare statements now and hand them out to friends before meetings. She tried to bait me with insults in front of others, but I stayed calm, almost annoyingly calm. There was also the legal pressure. The HOA's lawyer sent a bill in my mailbox, itemizing administrative costs and community protection fees. I stared at the paper and then at my bank app. I paid it, on time. With the same careful attention I used for every rule, I wanted them to feel the weight of their own machine. Every payment proved a point. I would not be crushed by their money game. I would survive their fines and still smile. Then came the audits. The HOA hired a surveyor to recheck the property lines. They wanted to find a leak, any mistake that could help them argue the deed was invalid. The man with the theodolite walked my shores like a ghost. He measured and remeasured. He called in notes on a small tablet and sent them back to the HOA. When the report came back, it confirmed what the deed already said. No mistake, no boundary dispute. My name was clear on every page. I printed the report and distributed copies to the neighborhood. A few people took them and read with watery eyes. Some mumbled apologies, others avoid. Dead me like a ship avoids a storm. Susan's tactics were failing, and mistakes cost her supporters. People who once cheered for her now wondered if they had been fooled, but rules have teeth, and teeth can bite if used without care. One board member, a quiet old man named Harold, lost his temper at a meeting. He stood up suddenly and accused me of showing off and humiliating the board. His voice shook with age and fear. He called me cruel names he should have kept to himself. I left the meeting quietly. The next day I found a stack of handwritten letters at my door, anonymous notes with threats hidden between friendly words. "Watch yourself," one said. "We will not let you ruin our home," said another. They were small things, cowardly things, but they had a weight that settled on the chest. I reported them to the board and to the police. The board pretended to be shocked. They promised investigations and fairness, but inside I knew promises were just words for people who wanted to sleep easy at night. I also found allies in unlikely places. A teenage boy named Marco, who liked fixing boats, offered to help me with repairs. An elderly widow named Mrs. Lang came by with coffee and told me about the old owner who sold the lake to me. A young couple across the street admitted they had voted for Susan without knowing what she would become. Their small acts mattered more than I expected. They gave me hope. They reminded me that power can't drown out every human voice, and when the HOA threatened to escalate the legal fight, these voices became witnesses. They told simple truths in a calm way. They described events, the signs, the banners, the way the board acted. Their words were small, but when many small truths gather, they become hard to ignore. Then I made a choice that surprised even me. I sent the HOA a formal letter, offering them a compromise. I would not sue them for trespass immediately. I would not lock the docks and chain off the shore. Instead, I offered a reasonable plan. If they wanted to hold a community event on the lake, they could apply for a license. They would pay a small fee for insurance and cleanup. They would sign a liability waiver and follow rules. I set for safety and respect. It sounded generous, but it had a purpose. It showed the neighborhood I was fair. It forced Susan to either accept a fair rule or reveal herself as unreasonable. Susan refused the offer publicly. She called it a stunt. She said I was trying to control my neighbors, and the crowd that listened shrugged, then turned their heads to the next argument. That night, I sat on my dock and watched the moon slice the water into silver lines. I thought about how petty wars become something larger, about how small rules can become tools to hurt people, about how a man with a deed can become a target, simply because he reminds others of truth. I also thought about endings, about how this fight could go on for months or years, about how easily things could worsen if hatred takes over. So I ask you now, as the pieces shift and the board grows angrier, if you were me, obeying every rule and offering fair compromises while they tried to destroy you, would you keep swallowing the small injustices to win the long game? Or would you finally break and use your power to punish them all at once? Which would you choose? Revenge slow and clean, or revenge loud and final? The war got quieter. Then it grew louder in small, dangerous ways. At first it was just looks and whispers. Then it was notes, slipped under my door with friendly words on top and threats underneath. Then one morning, I found a rope cut on my dock, not torn to pieces, just neatly sliced so my boat drifted a little and bumped the pilings. I did not post about it. I did not shout or call anyone a coward. I fixed the rope, quietly at dawn. But the message landed clear as a bell. They wanted to scare me, to show me I could be harmed without anyone ever taking responsibility. Still, I stayed steady. I photographed everything. I logged dates and times. I made a folder on my computer called Proof. It became my new bedrock, my small army of pages and pixels. Susan grew bolder in public and crueler in private. She would stand on her porch and glare as I took the trash out. She asked neighbors loaded questions about me as if she were building a case file. She hired a private investigator who walked around taking pictures of my property at odd hours. He seemed to enjoy the work like a collector finding rare coins. When the investigator approached me, I said hello and asked him nicely to stop trespassing. He smiled thinly and said he was doing his job. He did not know I was already doing mine. The HOA filed a formal complaint the next week. They claimed my ownership was forged. They claimed paperwork was false. They hired a small law firm from the city, and their letters began arriving like storm fronts. Demand for documents, demand for depositions, demand for me to stop all activity on the lake until a ruling was made. It was the kind of legal fog that can wear people down. Fees, days in court, time lost from work, stress that sticks to your bones. I read the first letter with a steady hand. Then I packed the deed, the survey, the old bills, the emails, the bank transfers, and the old receipts from the sale. I made copies and copies and copies. I felt like an army preparing for a siege with paper instead of swords. Some nights I dreamed of losing everything. I would wake up sweating and go down to the dock. The boat would be there. Bobbing silently in the moonlight, I would touch the wood and feel real again. This was not a game for me. This was my life and my memory and my small piece, so I fought back in small, clean ways. I filed a countersuit for trespass and for harassment. I gave the police the notes and the photos and the witness names. I called the county clerk and asked about public records until my voice grew hoarse. Every time they tried to manufacture a problem, I answered with facts and copies and calm voices in rooms that cared about rules more than gossip. The neighborhood split wider now. Some people who once scowled at me brought pies and said sorry with their heads down. Others put signs in their yards supporting the HOA and Susan like a flag of loyalty. Then one morning I woke to find my boat spray-painted with small childish words, not expensive damage, but humiliating enough to show intent. My first instinct was to find the culprits and scream. My second instinct was the one I chose to follow. I photographed the paint in detail. I tested samples and saved the peeling flakes in a bag. I sent the photos to the police and to a friend who runs a small local news blog. She asked me questions and listened without judgment. She told me if I wanted to go public, she could write a careful piece about harassment and HOA overreach. I hesitated for a long hour by the water. Going public would bring more attention. It would make me a story on the internet. It would make Susan a villain to some and a martyr to others. I thought of the teenagers who loved to fish there, of Mrs. Lang who fed me cookies and told stories about the old owner. I thought of the simple peace of having my boat and my nights by the lake. Finally, I decided to let the story breathe in the open air. Not to revenge hard or to humiliate with cruelty, but to show truth and to invite the neighborhood to see what had really happened. The blog published a short, careful piece. It included photos of the deed, quotes from 3 neighbors who had been kind, and the ugly picture of the painted boat. Within a day, people I had not seen in weeks waved from their cars and mouthed sorry from the safety of their windows. Some walked up and said they never knew the lake was private. Some said they felt tricked by the HOA. Others stayed silent and shifted away. Susan lost her cool in ways that surprised me. She called a special emergency meeting and accused me of ruining the community image. Her words were sharp and loud, and a little unhinged. Several people ask questions now. Why didn't the HOA check the deed before the banner? One woman asked, why did they put up signs claiming ownership without asking for proof? An older man wanted to know. Her control slipped like sand through fingers. But she did something else I did not expect. She started whispering threats about me in the city hall. She wrote letters to the county recorder claiming I had forged signatures. She said things in public that sounded small but had teeth when written down. This time the fight moved from the green lawns to the gray rooms of government. The legal process slowed them down. It forced depositions and made them justify their actions in public papers. It made the investigator explain why he walked my property at night. It made Susan answer questions under oath about the banner and the fishing tournament. The law is slow and ugly and expensive, but it is also a place where truth can stand and be seen. I spent long days in waiting rooms and long nights drafting statements. I felt tired and strangely alive, like someone who learns to build a shelter out of the very stones thrown at him. Then one afternoon, while reading a pile of notices on my porch, I heard a car door slam hard. Across the street, I looked up and saw Mrs. Lang holding a small box of old photos. She came over with tears in her eyes and placed the box in my hands without a word. Inside were pictures of the lake long before our houses stood there. Pictures of the original owner with a note in his handwriting. A note that mentioned the sale and a name that matched one on my deed. She had been saving these for years. She had been quietly watching the neighborhood spin with rules and had decided she could not stay silent anymore. Small acts like that changed everything. The case dragged on for months and attitudes shifted slowly. More people came forward with small truths that all fit together. The private investigators' reports were questioned. The signage was shown to be unauthorized, and Susan's confident voice began to crack in public records. Still, the cost had been real. Bills were paid, trust had been broken, and nights were sometimes thick with fear as I sat on the dock one late night and watched the reflection of the moon break into ribbons on the water. I asked myself a final question for that night. If you had the truth and the law on your side, but the cost of victory meant tearing a neighborhood apart, would you keep pressing until every single lie was crushed? Or would you stop early and try to rebuild what had been broken, even if some lies remained unpunished? The air felt different that morning. It was heavy, not with weather, but with the weight of something about to break. For months the HOA had pushed, pulled, threatened, and cornered me. For months I had answered with patience and proof, but storms do not last forever. They either pass quietly, or they end with thunder. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the walls pale, the judge calm, the lawyers sharp and restless. Susan sat across from me in her best jacket. Her smile was tight, her eyes full of the same fire that had burned all year. When the clerk called my name, I stood steady. The deed was in my hand, the survey report tucked under my arm, the photographs stacked in folders, every piece of proof I had collected, every note, every receipt, every letter, now had a place here. The judge asked simple questions. Who owned the lake? Who allowed the banners? Who gave permission for the fishing tournaments? The answers were simpler still. I did, they didn't, and no one ever asked. Susan's lawyer tried to twist the words. He spoke of community spirit and shared rights. He said I was selfish, that I ruined traditions. He painted me as a tyrant who would not let children fish, but each time he raised his voice, I lowered mine. Each time he spun a story, I laid down a page of fact. The judge listened longer to silence than to shouting, and then the moment came, the deed, the photos, the old letter from Mrs. Lang's box, the one with the original owner's handwriting. It all formed a chain so tight, not even Susan's voice could break it. The judge's words were steady, final, like stones hitting water. The lake is private property. The deed is valid. The HOA has no authority here. The gavel struck once, and it was over. But endings are never that simple. When we left the courtroom, Susan's face was pale with rage. Her supporters avoided her eyes. Some neighbors came to me quietly, shaking my hand, whispering they were glad truth had won. Others stayed silent, unwilling to admit how far they had followed her down the wrong path. The fishing club packed up their signs and poles. The banners were taken down. The notes stopped arriving. The investigator never returned. The lake grew quiet again. Too quiet. One evening I sat at the dock as the sun burned gold across the water. The silence felt strange, almost unreal after so many months of war. I heard frogs in the reeds, a heron flying low, the soft lap of water against the hull of my boat. And for the first time, I laughed softly to myself, because all this began with a single demand. Move your boat. They thought they had power. They thought they could control me with paper and anger. But in the end, the truth was larger than their rules. Yet not all victories are clean. Some neighbors stopped speaking to me. Some lawns turned their backs with cold silence. The community had been cracked, and cracks never vanish completely. But others grew closer. Mrs. Lang sat with me often and told old stories of the lake. Marco, the boy who helped with repairs, now fished by my side sometimes. The young couple who once doubted me invited me for dinner as a small olive branch. The war had ended, but the map of our neighborhood had changed forever, and I found myself thinking about Susan more than I wanted to admit. She had fought so hard, clung so tightly to control, that I almost pitied her. Almost, because deep inside I knew her kind never stop. They wait, they whisper, they look for the next rule to twist. Power is an old hunger, and it never leaves quietly. One night, as the wind rippled across the lake, I asked myself a harder question. What should I do now with this place? keep it private forever, locking out those who once tried to ruin me, or open it carefully, letting neighbors use it again under my rules, my terms, my watch. Justice had been served. But peace was a choice I had yet to make, so I'll ask you now, if you were in my place, holding the deed to an entire lake after surviving months of harassment, would you guard it with iron walls and never forgive, or would you share it again, knowing the same people who betrayed you might one day come knocking on your dock? Which choice would you make? Vengeance or grace?